so what do you know? Believe it or not, they just dropped the Mate 40 Pro. And to me, this phone, this is the ultimate expression of like, no matter how good their new phone is, it's impossible to recommend. Which sucks because this phone has some really technically impressive stuff. You can see this new color slash finish here on the back of this one. They call it Mystic Silver. And it has this sheen to it that reflects like pretty much every color of the rainbow, depending on what angle you hold it, which is technically impressive. And then around the front, you see the huge display, a roughly 2K 6.76 inch OLED display with a 90 Hz refresh rate, fingerprint reader underneath the glass, of course. And then they're doing what they did last year with the Mate series, which is curving that display right over the edges till it like melts into the side of the phone. Now, y'all know how I feel about actually using curved displays. They create unnecessary accidental touches, they can be frustrating, they cost more, and they're more fragile. But Huawei's sticking with it basically because they look so dramatic. Like this one's again curved so much that they had to move the power and volume buttons further back on the phone. And sometimes even the content on the display or the keyboard itself that you're typing on is like melted off of the side. Inconvenient, but technically impressive. Then around the back, there's even more. You can see the camera bump. They're calling this a space ring design inspired by the first photo of a black hole, which it might be a bit of a stretch, but it's definitely a unique design for the 4 cameras that they've put up in this phone. And because it's in the middle, actually it has the unique benefit of not rocking as much as most other phones that put the camera bump in the corner. And the cameras include a 50 megapixel massive primary sensor, 1/1.28 inches. And that's nearly RX100 1-inch sensor size. So very technically impressive. Then there's a 5x periscope telephoto lens, there's a macro camera, and there's a 100-degree ultra-wide. They're giving you stereo speakers with a real second speaker from a grill at the top and the earpiece. And so the stereo effect is better, and just in general, these speakers get really loud, and they're some of the loudest I've heard in a smartphone, and they actually sound good. So that is technically very impressive. Oh, and while we're talking about what's inside, this phone also has a 4400 milliamp hour battery, pretty solid flagship size cell, and it supports up to 66 watt charging, which is insanely fast. You might remember I just looked at the OnePlus 8T with its 65 watt fast charging, so I guess they literally one up that. But that whole thing went 0 to 100 in under 40 minutes, which is crazy. And then on top of that, it can do 50 watt wireless charging, which is incredible. And to top off everything, inside this phone is powered by their new Kirin 9000 chip, which is actually a 5nm chipset. And so this and Apple's A14 Bionic in the new iPhones are the first 5nm chipsets to performance and efficiency improvements. Now, this isn't the review, so I haven't tested battery life, and it almost makes me wonder why they didn't just go all out and drop a 120 Hz display in this phone if the 5nm chipset is so impressive and so efficient. But nevertheless, it's on that bleeding edge. It gives you stuff like Fusion HDR video with real-time processing of every frame, and just great overall performance, throwing around apps in multitasking and throughout this whole, you have this whole huge immersive display with razor thin bezels, and you did a pillbox cutout. But inside this one, you get a standard selfie camera and another 100-degree ultra wide. So not some like pointless monochrome or depth sensor or building. And you can see it's running EMUI 11 here. Not my favorite UI, as I've talked about, but it doesn't mean there aren't any nice features. There are multitasking features and quick launchers and customization and plenty of stuff like that. But it's the app situation that's still a sticking point. Huawei's app gallery continues to grow, which is great, but it's still missing some pretty fundamental pieces that I would say most people would find needed daily on their phone. Instagram, YouTube, some of my favorite productivity apps aren't here, all of the Google apps, of course, and sometimes I'll actually just list them in the app gallery, but as literally web apps. So with a link you can see for good measure. It's just launching it in the